200 Russian soldiers walked onto a frozen river in the middle of the night. Not one of them walked back. January 2026, northern Luhansk sector. A tributary of the Siverskaya Donets, frozen solid under minus 22 degrees Celsius. The ice was thick enough to support armored vehicles. Russian planners knew this. They'd been monitoring the freeze cycle for weeks. The plan was simple. Move 200 infantry across the river under cover of darkness. Establish a foothold on the western bank. Expand the bridgehead before dawn. Link up with mechanized forces waiting 3 kilometers east. No vehicles, no engines, no thermal signatures large enough to trigger Ukrainian early warning systems. Just men, boots, and rifles moving across white ice under a black sky. It should have worked. 6 months earlier, it would have worked. But Ukraine had changed the rules, and Russia didn't know it yet. I'm your host at Navy Battlefront, where we break down the most critical military operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing one of the most devastating ambushes of the entire war. An operation that lasted less than 40 minutes, but redefined how both sides think about river crossings, thermal surveillance, and the future of infantry movement in winter warfare. Because what happened on that frozen river wasn't just a tactical failure. It was a technological reckoning. To understand why 200 soldiers died on the ice, you need to understand what Ukraine built in the months before this crossing, and why Russian intelligence completely missed it. In late 2025, Ukraine began deploying a new generation of reconnaissance drones across the northern Luhansk front. These weren't the commercial quadcopters that had defined the early years of the war. These were purpose-built surveillance platforms equipped with long-wave infrared thermal imaging sensors capable of detecting temperature differentials as small as 0.03 degrees Celsius. The systems were based on a modified Ukrainian-manufactured PD-2 airframe, upgraded with French-supplied Safran Euroflir 410 sensor packages. Range: over 50 kilometers. Endurance: 12 hours. Operating altitude: 3,000 meters, high enough to be invisible to ground troops, low enough for the thermal resolution to distinguish individual human signatures against ambient background. Ukraine had quietly established a networked drone surveillance corridor, stretching 47 kilometers along the river system. 6 drones operating in overlapping orbits, continuous coverage. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The system had been operational since November 2025, 2 full months before the crossing attempt. Russian signals intelligence should have detected it. The drones communicated with ground stations via encrypted data links on frequencies that, while difficult to intercept, produced detectable electromagnetic emissions. A competent SIGINT operation would have flagged the pattern. But Russian electronic warfare assets in the northern Luhansk sector had been redeployed south in December 2025 to support operations near Siversk. The unit responsible for monitoring Ukrainian drone communications, the 15th Electronic Warfare Brigade's Northern Detachment, had been reduced to a skeleton crew operating degraded equipment. Their primary Krasuka 4 jamming system had suffered a coolant failure on December 29th. The replacement part was sitting in a depot outside Rostov-on-Don. Nobody had signed the transfer order. This is how gaps form, not through grand strategic failures, through a coolant pump, a missing signature, a logistics clerk who went on leave. The crossing was planned by the 144th Motor Rifle Division, a unit that had been fighting in the Luhansk sector since mid-2024. By January 2026, the division was operating at roughly 60% strength. Replacements had filled some gaps, but unit cohesion was uneven. Many of the soldiers assigned to the crossing operation had less than 4 months of combat experience. The operational order came from the headquarters of the 20th Combined Arms Army. The objective was straightforward: establish a presence on the western bank of the tributary to threaten the flank of Ukrainian positions near Crimea. Russian forces had been trying to encircle Crimea from the north for months. Every attempt had stalled. This crossing was supposed to change the geometry. The plan called for 4 groups of 50 soldiers each, spaced 200 meters apart, crossing at staggered intervals beginning at 200 local time. Total crossing distance, approximately 400 meters of open ice. Estimated crossing time per group, 8 minutes at a controlled pace. No artillery preparation, no smoke screens, no electronic warfare support. The entire concept relied on one assumption: darkness and cold would provide sufficient concealment. According to intercepted planning communications later analyzed by Ukrainian military intelligence, the 144th Division staff had assessed the risk of drone surveillance as minimal based on weather conditions. Cloud cover was expected at 60%. Temperatures were forecast at -22. The staff assessment concluded that Ukrainian drone operations would be significantly degraded or suspended due to the extreme cold. This assessment was wrong. The PD-2 airframes had been winterized with heated battery compartments and de-icing systems on the sensor turrets. They could operate effectively down to -35. The Euroflyer 410 thermal sensors actually performed better in extreme cold. The greater the temperature differential between a warm body and the frozen landscape, the sharper the signature. Russian soldiers crossing a frozen river at -22 weren't invisible. They were beacons. January 17, 2026, 1:43 local time. Drone operator Sergeant First Class Dmytro Koval was monitoring his sector from a ground control station 14 kilometers west of the river. His call sign was Falcon 3. He was operating the southernmost drone in the surveillance network, orbiting at 2,800 meters. At 1:43, Koval's thermal display registered a cluster of heat signatures emerging from a tree line on the eastern bank. At first, he counted 12, then 20. Then the count kept climbing. Koval had been a drone operator for 9 months. He'd tracked small Russian reconnaissance teams before, 3 to 5 soldiers, moving fast, trying to probe Ukrainian positions. This was different. The signatures kept appearing, spreading along a 600-meter section of the eastern bank. Organizing into distinct groups, he keyed his radio. Call sign Falcon 3 to Sector Command. Multiple thermal contacts. Eastern bank. Grid reference 48 north, 38 east. Count exceeding 50 and climbing. Possible company-level movement toward the river. Sector Command acknowledged. They tasked a second drone, Falcon 1, operating 12 kilometers north, to reposition for overlapping coverage. At 1:51, Falcon 1's thermal feed confirmed what Koval was seeing. 4 distinct groups, each approximately 50 personnel, staged at intervals along the tree line. Equipment signatures consistent with infantry carrying personal weapons and light packs. No vehicle thermals, no heavy weapons signatures. The picture was clear. This was a dismounted river crossing, and it was about to begin. At Sector Command, Lieutenant Colonel Oksana Tereshko faced her first decision. She had confirmation of roughly 200 enemy soldiers preparing to cross. She had 2 options: engage immediately with available indirect fire assets, or wait until the crossing was underway. Engaging now meant hitting them in the tree line, where cover was available and dispersal was easier. Waiting meant catching them on the open ice, where there was no cover, no concealment, and no escape route that didn't involve running 400 meters in either direction. Tereshko waited. The risk of waiting was real. If the Russians crossed successfully and established positions on the western bank, Ukrainian forces would face a costly counterattack to dislodge them. Every minute of delay was a gamble. But the mathematics of the ambush were overwhelming. 200 soldiers on flat, open ice, with no cover, no supporting fire, and no awareness that they were being watched. That was a kill zone that might never present itself again. Tereshko gave the order. All units hold. Weapons tight. Wait for her command. 2:07. The first group stepped onto the ice. 50 soldiers moved in a dispersed formation, roughly 5 meters between each man. They moved carefully. Ice can crack under concentrated weight. The point man tested the surface with each step. Behind him, the group followed in a wide wedge. Falcon 3's thermal camera tracked every step. On the monitor, the soldiers appeared as bright white figures against the dark gray of the frozen river. The contrast was extraordinary. Koval later described it as watching white chess pieces move across a black board. At 2:11, the second group began crossing, 200 meters south of the first. Then the third group at 2:14, the fourth at 2:16. By 2:18, all 200 soldiers were on the ice. The first group was approximately 250 meters from the eastern bank, past the halfway point. The last group had just left the tree line. This was the moment. Tereshko's combined strike force consisted of 3 elements positioned on the western bank. First, a mortar battery, 4 120mm mortar tubes from the 81st Air Assault Brigade, pre-registered on the river crossing points. Effective range, 7 kilometers. Rate of fire, 12 rounds per minute per tube. Ammunition type, a mix of high explosive fragmentation and smoke rounds. Second, an FPV drone strike team. 12 operators controlling modified Vampire series first-person view drones armed with RPG-7 warheads. These weren't reconnaissance platforms. They were guided munitions. Speed, 140 kilometers per hour. Warhead weight, 2.6 kilograms of shaped charge, enough to eliminate a cluster of infantry in a single strike. Third, a conventional drone team operating 6 DJI Matrice series platforms modified to drop VOG-17 fragmentation grenades. Each drone carried 4 grenades, 24 drops total. Tereshko's plan was sequenced in 3 phases. Phase 1, FPV drones strike the lead group and the rear group simultaneously. This traps the 2 middle groups on the ice with no clear direction of escape. Phase 2, mortar fire on the center of the river, targeting the main body. Mixed high-explosive and airburst rounds to maximize casualties on the open surface. Phase 3, drop drones engage survivors attempting to retreat to either bank. 2:19. Tereshko gave the order. 12 FPV drones launched simultaneously from concealed positions along the western bank. 6 targeted the lead group, now 270 meters from the eastern shore. 6 targeted the rear group, barely 80 meters onto the ice. The drones covered the distance in under 30 seconds. At 140 kilometers per hour, there was no warning. No engine noise audible over the wind. No visual signature against the dark sky. The first impacts hit at 2:19 and 40 seconds. 6 RPG warheads detonated among the lead group within a 3-second window. The shaped charges weren't optimized for anti-personnel use, but at point-blank range against unarmored infantry on open ground, the effect was devastating. Fragmentation and blast pressure killed or wounded at least 20 soldiers in the first salvo. Simultaneously, 6 more drones struck the rear group. The soldiers at the back of the formation had barely cleared the bank. Some were still on the shoreline ice shelf. The explosion sent bodies across the frozen surface. Panic. Immediate, absolute panic. The 2 center groups, 100 soldiers caught between the destroyed lead and rear elements, had nowhere to go. Forward meant running into the wreckage of the lead group. Backward meant crossing through the devastation of the rear group. Left and right was open ice, stretching to the horizon. Some soldiers dropped flat. Others began running. A few tried to return fire, shooting blindly into the dark sky. There was nothing to shoot at. Phase 2 began at 2:21. 48 120mm mortar rounds left the tubes in the first 60 seconds. The pre-registered coordinates were accurate to within 15 meters. The first salvo landed among the center-left group. A 120mm high-explosive mortar round produces a lethal fragmentation radius of approximately 25 meters on a hard surface. On ice, the effect was compounded. Each detonation didn't just spray shrapnel, it fractured the frozen surface. Cracks radiated outward from each impact point, like spider webs. By the third salvo, the ice began to break. Not everywhere. The river was frozen to a depth of roughly 40 centimeters, thick enough to support infantry under normal conditions. But concentrated mortar fire doesn't create normal conditions. The repeated shock waves weakened the crystalline structure. Fracture lines connected between impact points. Sections began to shift and tilt. At 2:24, a section approximately 30 meters wide collapsed. Soldiers fell into water that was minus 1.8 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, cold water shock is instantaneous. Muscles seize. Breathing becomes uncontrollable. A strong swimmer in combat gear has approximately 90 seconds before incapacitation. These weren't swimmers. They were wearing winter combat uniforms, body armor, ammunition carriers, and boots. They were carrying rifles and packs. A soldier in full kit who falls through ice in the dark doesn't swim. He sinks. Intercepted radio traffic from the 144th Division's command frequency, later declassified by Ukrainian military intelligence, captured the chaos in real time. 2:22. Crossing under fire! Crossing under fire! Mortars! We have casualties on the ice. 2:24. Ice is breaking. Ice is breaking in Sector 2. Soldiers in the water. 2:25. Request immediate suppressive fire on Western Bank. Request artillery support. 2:26. No artillery available. All batteries tasked south. Repeat. No available fire support. 2:27. Evacuation. We need evacuation. Men are in the water. They're drowning. 2:29. Command. This is crossing element. Request permission to abort. Repeat. Request abort. 2:31. Silence on the crossing element's frequency. The artillery request at 2:25 revealed a critical failure in Russian operational planning. The 144th Division had not pre-positioned fire support for the crossing. Their artillery batteries, primarily two S-19 Emsta self-propelled howitzers, were 16 kilometers south, supporting a different operation near Siversk. Redirecting them would take a minimum of 20 minutes for repositioning and recalculation. By the time they could fire, the crossing would be over. This was not an oversight. It was a deliberate choice. The operational plan explicitly excluded artillery preparation to maintain surprise. The assumption was that if the crossing went undetected, fire support would be unnecessary. If it was detected, the plan was to abort before engagement. Nobody had planned for a scenario where detection occurred silently, where the enemy watched and waited, where the ambush was sprung not at the tree line, but at the point of maximum vulnerability. Phase 3 began at 2:26. 6 drop drones moved over the river at an altitude of 100 meters. Their thermal cameras identified clusters of survivors. Soldiers crawling across the ice. Soldiers huddled in groups. Soldiers dragging wounded comrades toward the eastern bank. 24 VOG-17 grenades dropped over the next 4 minutes. Each grenade had a lethal radius of approximately 7 meters. The operators prioritized groups of 3 or more soldiers to maximize effect. The mortar fire continued in sustained bursts. The mortar crews shifted their aims systematically, north to south, then south to north, creating overlapping kill zones across the entire crossing area. By 2:35, the organized crossing had completely disintegrated. Survivors were scattered individually across the ice, many wounded, many disoriented. Some had discarded their weapons and equipment to move faster. Some weren't moving at all. At 2:38, Falcon 3's thermal feed showed a cluster of approximately 40 heat signatures reaching the eastern bank. These were survivors from the rear group and some soldiers from the center who had managed to retreat. They disappeared into the tree line. On the western side, no Russian soldiers reached the bank. Not one. By 2:45, The mortar fire ceased. The drones continued to orbit, monitoring for movement. Isolated heat signatures still appeared on the ice. Wounded soldiers slowly cooling. At -22 degrees, an incapacitated human body reaches ambient temperature in approximately 90 minutes. The thermal signatures faded one by one. Dawn came at 7:14. Ukrainian reconnaissance teams moved onto the ice at first light. The scene was documented extensively, both for intelligence purposes and for the inevitable after-action review. The crossing zone stretched roughly 600 meters along the river. The ice surface was cratered in over 30 locations. 3 major sections had collapsed entirely, leaving open water that was already beginning to refreeze in the extreme cold. Bodies were scattered across the ice, some partially submerged in refreezing water. Equipment was everywhere. Rifles, ammunition pouches, radios, medical kits, ration packets. The recovery teams cataloged the abandoned equipment. Among the most significant finds, 7 R187P1 Ozart encrypted digital radios. These tactical communication devices, manufactured by Angstrom in Moscow, operated on frequency-hopping protocols that Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists had been trying to characterize for months. Recovering intact units with their encryption modules was an intelligence windfall. Also recovered, 21PN 116 thermal weapon sights, 14 AK, 12 rifles in serviceable condition, 3 RPG, 26 single-use anti-tank launchers unfired, and over 2,000 rounds of 5.45 by 39mm ammunition still in magazines. Documents found on casualties provided order of battle intelligence. Unit patches confirmed the soldiers belonged to the 3rd Battalion, 488th Motor Rifle Regiment, 144th Motor Rifle Division. Planning documents found in a waterproof pouch on what appeared to be a platoon commander included a hand-drawn map of the crossing zone, with phase lines and rally points on the western bank. The rally points would never be used. Ukrainian forces estimated the total Russian casualties at between 100 and 140 personnel. The precise number was impossible to confirm. An unknown number of bodies had gone under the ice when sections collapsed, and some wounded may have been recovered by Russian forces from the eastern bank during the night. But intercepts of the 144th Division's internal communications over the following 48 hours referenced catastrophic personnel losses and a request to designate the 3rd Battalion combat ineffective. The ambush lasted 38 minutes from the first FPV impact to the cessation of mortar fire. Ukrainian losses, 0. No Ukrainian soldier was within direct fire range of the crossing. The entire engagement was conducted remotely. Drones for surveillance, drones for precision strike, mortars for area denial. The closest Ukrainian personnel to the river were the mortar crews, positioned 4.2 kilometers from the crossing point. The FPV operators were 8 kilometers back, the thermal drone operators 14. This asymmetry is the story, not just of this engagement, but of where this war has gone. The aftermath generated consequences that extended far beyond the frozen river. Within the Russian military command structure, the failure triggered an immediate investigation by the 20th Combined Arms Armies Operations Directorate. According to signals intelligence collected in the weeks following the crossing attempt, 3 officers from the 144th Division's planning staff were relieved of their positions. The battalion commander of the 3rd Battalion was among the casualties, which complicated accountability. The investigation's preliminary findings, referenced in intercepted communications, identified 3 primary failures. First, the absence of pre-positioned fire support, which left the crossing force completely defenseless once detected. Second, the failure to conduct electronic reconnaissance of the crossing zone in the 72 hours prior to the operation, which would have detected the Ukrainian drone surveillance network. Third, the flawed weather assessment that assumed extreme cold would ground Ukrainian drone operations. The third finding was the most consequential. It revealed a systemic gap in Russian intelligence regarding Ukrainian drone capabilities. The assumption that cold weather degrades drone operations was based on experience with commercial-grade platforms from 2022 and 2023. By January 2026, Ukraine had moved beyond commercial drones entirely in its surveillance architecture. The winterized PD-2 platforms were a different category of capability, and Russian intelligence hadn't updated its threat assessment to reflect this. On the Ukrainian side, the engagement was studied intensively as a model for what commanders began calling thermal denial operations. The concept was straightforward. Use persistent thermal surveillance to identify enemy movement in conditions where conventional observation is impossible: night, extreme cold, fog, snowfall, and then engage with standoff weapons before the enemy is aware of detection. The implications went beyond river crossings. Any dismounted movement in winter conditions was now potentially observable. Trench rotations, supply carries, reconnaissance patrols, casualty evacuations. Anything involving warm bodies moving through cold environments could be detected, tracked, and targeted. Russian forces in the northern Luhansk sector adapted quickly, or tried to. Within 2 weeks of the crossing disaster, intercepted communications showed orders requiring thermal signature reduction measures for any movement near the front line. Soldiers were instructed to wear thermal blankets as outer garments during movement. Units were directed to move only during periods of maximum cloud cover, which limited thermal drone effectiveness by reducing altitude ceilings and degrading sensor resolution. But these countermeasures created their own problems. Thermal blankets restricted movement and noise discipline. Cloud cover-dependent movement windows compressed operational flexibility into unpredictable time frames. A formation that can only move when the weather cooperates is a formation that has lost initiative. The diplomatic dimension materialized within days. Russian state media did not report the crossing failure. No official statement was issued. But bloggers associated with the Russian military community, some with known connections to the Defense Ministry's Information Directorate, began posting accounts that described a Ukrainian attack on Russian positions near the river that was repelled with losses on both sides. The framing was inverted. The crossing was never mentioned. Ukrainian military intelligence published a detailed summary of the engagement on January 22nd, 5 days after the event. The summary included thermal drone footage, grainy white-on-black imagery showing the 4 groups moving onto the ice, the FPV strikes, the mortar impacts, the ice collapse. The footage was viewed over 11 million times in the first 72 hours. Among the viewers, military analysts in NATO countries who were already studying the evolution of drone warfare in Ukraine. The footage became a case study in several Western military education programs within weeks. The U.S. Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Moore, Georgia, incorporated the engagement into its winter warfare curriculum by February 2026. The lesson was not about Ukraine specifically. The lesson was about the disappearance of concealment. For centuries, darkness was a military asset. Night operations relied on the fundamental principle that what cannot be seen cannot be targeted. Winter added another layer: cold suppressed movement, reduced visibility, and created environmental conditions that degraded optical systems. Thermal imaging changed the equation decades ago, but persistent, networked, drone-mounted thermal surveillance changed it categorically. It's one thing to have a thermal sight on a vehicle or a helicopter that passes overhead. It's another to have 6 drones in continuous orbit, feeding real-time thermal data to a command post that can coordinate multiple strike systems simultaneously. The Russian soldiers who stepped onto that ice on January 17th were operating under assumptions that were outdated by at least 6 months. They believed darkness and cold would protect them. Those assumptions were rooted in experience that no longer applied. Comment thermal if you think persistent drone surveillance has permanently changed winter warfare. The deeper strategic question is whether this engagement represents an anomaly or a trend. River crossings under fire have always been among the most dangerous military operations. The Dnieper crossing attempts of 2023, the failed Russian pontoon crossings at Bilohorivka in 2022. History is full of river crossing disasters, but this wasn't a contested crossing in the traditional sense. There was no opposing force on the far bank firing small arms and anti-tank weapons. There were no mines in the shallows. There was no artillery duel between competing batteries. There was a network of sensors in the sky, a set of weapon systems controlled from kilometers away, and a command structure that had the discipline to watch 200 enemy soldiers walk into a trap and wait for the perfect moment. The asymmetry wasn't technological. Both sides have drones. Both sides have thermal imaging. Both sides have mortars. The asymmetry was architectural. Ukraine had built a system. Sensors connected to decision-makers, connected to shooters, operating continuously, automated in its surveillance, and human in its command decisions. Russia had a plan that assumed the system didn't exist. One side was fighting in 2026. The other was planning as if it were 2024. Subscribe if you want to understand how modern surveillance technology is rewriting the fundamentals of ground warfare. There's one more element of this story that deserves attention. The evacuation that never came. When the soldiers on the ice began calling for evacuation at 2:27, their calls went to the 144th Division's Tactical Operations Center. The TOC was 8 kilometers from the river. It had communications. It had vehicles. It had the authority to order a rescue operation. No rescue was launched. The reasons, pieced together from subsequent intercepts, were a combination of paralysis and impossibility. The TOC had no immediate reaction force designated for the crossing operation. No vehicles had been pre-staged near the eastern bank. The nearest mechanized unit was 7 kilometers away and not on alert status. Even if vehicles had been available, driving to the river's edge would have exposed them to the same drone network that had just destroyed the crossing force. Ukrainian thermal drones would have detected vehicle thermals at even greater range than dismounted soldiers. Any rescue force would have become a second target. The TOC's senior officer, a lieutenant colonel whose name appeared in intercepted communications but cannot be independently confirmed, reportedly stated that sending a rescue force would compound the disaster without saving anyone. The assessment was probably correct. It was also the kind of correct that leaves a mark on everyone who has to live with it. 40 soldiers made it back to the eastern bank. 160 did not. Among the recovered documents was a personal letter, partially water-damaged, found in the breast pocket of a soldier from Novosibirsk. It was addressed to someone named Katya. The letter discussed plans for after the war: a house, a garden, a dog. It was dated January 14th, 3 days before the crossing. Ukrainian military intelligence redacted the soldier's name before publishing the document summary. They published the existence of the letter without its contents. The gesture was noted by several Russian military bloggers who interpreted it variously as propaganda, psychological warfare, or basic human decency. It was probably all three. The frozen tributary remains a contested zone. Ukrainian forces reinforced their positions on the western bank in the days following the engagement. Russian forces pulled back from their staging areas on the eastern bank, establishing new positions 2 kilometers further east. No further crossing attempts have been made at that location as of March 2026. The 6-drone thermal surveillance network remains operational. It has been expanded. 2 additional drones were added in February, extending coverage another 12 kilometers north. Similar networks are being deployed along other river systems in the Luhansk and Donetsk sectors. The ice melted in early March. The river flows now, cold and brown with spring runoff. The craters on the banks are filling with mud. Equipment that wasn't recovered is sinking into the riverbed. By summer, there will be no visible trace of what happened on January 17th. But the lessons are permanent. Concealment is no longer guaranteed by darkness. Cold weather is no longer a shield. And a river crossing that isn't supported by electronic warfare, counter-drone systems, and pre-positioned fire support isn't a military operation. It's a walk into a kill zone you can't see. One conclusion: persistent thermal drone networks have eliminated the advantage of nighttime dismounted movement in winter conditions. The darkness that protected infantry for millennia now betrays them. One consequence: Russian forces in the northern Luhansk sector have been forced to fundamentally restructure their movement protocols, accepting severe operational constraints in exchange for survival. The 144th Motor Rifle Division remains combat degraded as of March 2026. One risk: Ukraine's thermal surveillance architecture depends on a continuous supply of specialized sensor packages from Western partners. If that supply chain is disrupted through political shifts, production delays, or Russian strikes on logistics networks, the surveillance gaps that protected Russian movements before November 2025 could reappear. 200 soldiers crossed a frozen river, believing the night would hide them. The night saw everything, and in modern warfare, being seen is the same as being destroyed.